and ethical pursuits on principles rather than revealed or preordained truths, and believing that one such principle can lead us to celebrate and protect this wondrous planet, this blue boat, our home. By seeking to follow principles, we must then engage the world. To understand how to live, we need to open our hearts and our minds to new ideas and not discard old ones just because they may seem out of fashion. Principles serve as the starting point for a conversation as well as a goal that can guide our actions. The seventh principle, affirming and promoting the respect for the interdependent web of existence of which we are all a part, is an acknowledgement that this blue boat, this beautiful planet, is worthy of our attention. But what does that mean to us, to respect that well? This is where our presenters tonight have so much to offer. Mark and Linda fully embody this ideal in the way they have chosen to live their lives. Since I first got to know them, they have challenged and informed my life. But they aren't the strident, take no prisoners, my way or the highway kind of activists. Instead, they engage, they encourage, and they inspire those with whom they come into contact by both their studied and lived understanding of our world and their demonstrated commitment to the principles of sustainability. But possibly most importantly, in their motivation, which comes from a place of love. As they raise their three wonderful children, Emma, Claire, and Martin, they never pretend that what they're doing is easy, but they also let us experience the joy that's brought into their lives, whether it's in those fresh eggs that they bring each week or the wonderful weaving of words that form the deep, meaningful story that draws us in. The Barnes-Runquist family drives an hour each way to come to fellowship on Sunday mornings, often bringing their children back to town during the week for coming of age or OWL or youth group. All of us return the favor, well, we return it once, maybe twice a year, by trekking out to the farm. And my favorite is on the eve of the solstice for a bonfire and a potluck. During the decade that we have engaged in this winter ritual, we've been able to watch their farmhouse's restoration proceed from bare lath and exposed wires to beautifully finished walls, with the corn-powered stove providing heat quietly in the corner. The farm is a metaphor for the constant attention, which is difficult, but also in their lives has provided them with such rewards. If you ever doubt that science and spirituality can be joined, just listen to Linda during our annual apple communion. She will describe how an apple goes from flower to fruit with perfect scientific language, but with such awe and reverence that when you take that first bite of the apple, it is truly a mystical experience. Unless we believe that technology can't be holy, get in a conversation with Mark about his windmill. The sparkle in his eyes as he describes how the power it is made and saved and sent into the grid thanks to the wind that blows above their tree limbs will convince you that within the movement of years, there is a connection to the sacred. And so I am pleased and honored to welcome Linda Barnes and Mark Lundquist.
Good evening. Thank you, Brian. Thank you to the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Duluth for their generous hosting of this conference, and thank you for asking me to speak tonight. Lest you think Mark is speaking tonight, he is not, at least not up here, but he is the IT dude, and I want to give him full credit for taking the vast majority of the pictures that you'll see this evening. He is a full partner in this endeavor. It's good to be back in Duluth. I graduated further on up the hill from UMD in 1983. I graduated with my degree in biology, and I still miss this town. My husband was born here, and we still make annual summer expeditions to northern Minnesota to spend a week in the Boundary Waters. A poignant moment for me occurred on a trip many years ago when our Prairie-born eldest daughter was just 3 years old. We were headed north as the roads grew continually narrower, first from I-35 to Iowa, from Iowa to Cloquet, to Highway 53, through the Iron Range, to Highway 1, to Ely, finally to the narrow and winding Fernberg Trail north of Ely. As we were welcoming the change of being enveloped in the northern boreal forest, from the back seat we heard the toddler complain, "I can't see anything, there's too many trees." We knew then that she was a child of the open prairies and not the northern forest. But she has adjusted quite well to swimming, canoeing, and portaging. Since I left Duluth, like everybody, my life has taken a number of unanticipated twists. Much like now, in 1983, the United States was in recession. It was a struggle to find a job, and when I finally did, I spent my days washing dishes. Not just any dishes, but labware for a biotech company in Minnetonka, Minnesota. The people there were so bright, so energetic about the possible advancements that genetic engineering could bring us. I was inspired. At that time, the field was so new that we had to construct equipment necessary to do the experiments because you couldn't buy the equipment to do experiments with DNA yet. I was lucky. After 9 months of doing dishes, I moved up to a position in the lab. In that position, I participated in introducing genes into corn, canola, and tobacco. After 5 years, I decided I was ready for more interesting work and a living wage. I chose to move on to grad school, which really isn't a living wage, but it's a start. I enrolled at Iowa State University in the program of molecular, cellular, and developmental biology. These people scared me. I was easily intimidated. They were so sure of what they were doing. We spent a great deal of time in the lab searching for the answers to extremely specific questions, and virtually no time asking larger, why are we doing these questions, except for me. Without going into a long, not so interesting story, let me say that it concerned me when I learned that my graduate research was funded by Sandoz Pharmaceuticals, and what I was working on was to become field crops. I began to think that perhaps this wasn't really such a good idea. I asked how these genetically engineered plants were tested for safety in the environment and in our food. I got no satisfactory answers. There are no satisfactory answers. I awkwardly finished my degree. At the same time, Mark and I, newly married, had begun gardening to feed ourselves and our new family. It started small, first in a 20 by 20 foot garden in the backyard of our rental house in Ames. Then one neighbor offered their garden space to us, then another. We even found some land outside of town on a farm. Before we left Ames, we were gardening in 3 backyards and 1 at a farm. After graduation, we bought a farm in what I would call a food desert. We could afford it because the American food system in the Midwest does not support small or diverse farms. Our landscape is littered with empty farmsteads now too small to work in the U.S. industrial food system. We were choosing to participate in the food system a little differently. We chose to produce a little oasis in that desert. This was brought home to me the first time we met one of our neighbors. Now keep in mind, neighbors where I live are anybody who lives within 1.5 miles of you. An 11-year-old boy came down the road to sell us some magazines as a fundraiser for school. As I was filling out the form, he suggested with much authority that we did not need such a big garden. He implied that because we had not come from here, that we somehow had made a big mistake. I now had some inkling as to what his parents, our neighbors, were thinking. Another neighbor suggested that our garden was too big for our family. "What do you need all that for?" was his remark. I felt a detachment from the interconnected web of my neighbors. We bought the farm to nurture ourselves and our family, to give to it of ourselves physically and spiritually. It strikes me as ironic that we can and do call the land our own, or the mortgage company's, when what I really want is for the land to call me its own. I want to belong. I want to feel the timelessness of the soil in my soul and the sunshine on my skin. I want to watch storms approach with calm, mindful appreciation. I want to hear the prairie wind in my ears and feel its freedom in my spirit. I want to belong. This is the heart of the seventh principle for me: respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. To be detached from this web is painful. I feel as though I'm caught between two worlds, one human contrived but important to my social well-being. This world demands that I be on time, that I'm comfortable in buildings and places of commerce, and that I act as if pretty much everything's okay. The second world, the natural world, is much more calming to me. I find this natural world essential to my mental health, and I feel it when I'm not getting enough. In this place, time is measured by the motion of the sun, and work is measured by the labor of my hands. The present destruction of the natural world is a result of sense of entitlement, mass consumerism, and corporate policies that demand ever-increasing profits to be considered sound, viable businesses. In order to turn around this destruction, we must fill the void of that consumerism keeps promising to satiate with the real stuff of community, nature, and a real sense of belonging to both. Fundamentally, I believe it is this displacement from community and nature that's responsible for climate change, social inequities, and I fear war. In light of this, what does farming or our food system have to do with our blue boat home? I'd say everything. If we are to recognize that our planet is sacred, to be true to the whole of our seventh principle, then food is the most direct interface between our sacred earth and ourselves. Aside from the air we breathe, the most intimate of connections is food. Food is the result of a wild alchemy between air, mineral, and light. It is the blood and body. It is the sacrifice. We ought to hold it as sacred. Decisions about how you satisfy your hunger, how you nourish yourself, can profoundly affect the environment. At some level, we know this is true. Look at how human cultures gather around food. We use it to celebrate birth with meals brought to the house of a new baby, weddings, reunions, and funerals. Finally, death, when the meal is shared following a funeral, giving people time to visit and remember together. Everything from the cultivation of crops and raising of livestock, how it is raised, to processing, packaging, shipping, storage, and how you cook it has an impact on human mental and physical health as well as the environment. I'd like to suggest that human health and environmental health not be separated. They are one and the same. I also believe that environmental justice and social justice are inseparable. From this perspective, then, food and agriculture, community and belonging to each other, and nature and the environment, I want to speak now how I believe we come to make fundamental changes in our approach to our beautiful home planet, and to recognize our place on it. This is somewhat of a personal perspective of 4 seasons. Winter, a time of harsh realities. Spring, a time to work. Summer, a time of connection and celebration. And fall, a time of harvest, gratitude, and reflection. Winter. Winter is the harshest season. Sharp in its hard ice, the wind penetrates the coat and gloves. Our flesh is so vulnerable. Deep down, we know we can hardly survive here. It is a time of winter for our species, too. Strange, adaptable ape, how did we get here? We're in a time of human-induced climate change. It is a peril of proportions I find difficult to imagine. Peril not only for ourselves, but all living things on this planet and the very systems on which each depends. Winter is a hard place in the soul, a place of doubt and isolation. A place that whispers in the darkness, why bother? It's no use. Feed only yourself. It won't be enough. It's too late. How can I say that? Agricultural production is so great that we choose to turn grain into fuel. Come to Iowa, there's nothing but corn and soybeans, a veritable sea of just two crops. We're the most altered state in the nation. We have less native space left than any other state. And we've grown fat on this grain. Our livestock has grown fat on this overabundance of corn. But there is a starving of a different kind. We are in the unique situation now in that people, especially those of lower socioeconomic class, suffer simultaneously from obesity and chronic nutrition-related diseases. These are called undernutrition. Currently, the average American spends more on health care than on food. So we should eat more fruits and vegetables, right? Even attaining complete nutrition from these closer-to-earth foods is more difficult. In just 30 years, much of our fresh produce has lost up to 30% of its nutritional quality. By being bred for shipping and long-term storage, what nurtures bacteria and fungi that cause food spoilage is the same sugar, vitamins, and minerals that nurture you. Reduce those in unprocessed food and the spoilage is reduced, and so is your good nutrition. The produce makes it to the grocery store, sometimes more than a year after it's been picked, still like plastic fruit, unspoiled. 20% of the fossil fuel in the United States goes towards agriculture. On average, we use 10 fossil fuel calories for every 1 calorie of food produced. Only 1/5 of that is for production. The remainder is used for processing, storage, packaging, and transportation. It is a wildly inefficient and unsustainable system. The earth, that is the soil that sustains our agriculture, is largely treated like dirt. We leave it bare, subjected to erosion. The USDA's acceptable soil loss rate is 4 to 5 tons per acre per year. The average is between 10 and 20 tons per year. In the Midwest, 1/2 of the original topsoil formed from 10,000 years of prairie sod is gone in less than 100 years of crop farming. How much longer will we continue this extractive farming? Wendell Berry once suggested that we took a solution, small-scale farming with fertility distributed evenly by livestock on pasture, and made 2 problems: manure, concentration in confinement, and fields that now require chemical fertilizers. Like fertilizers, chemicals, and manure, what is beneficial in one context is toxic in another. Soil-choked streams cover eggs of aquatic species, preventing them from reproducing. Abrade tissues of aquatic animals and plants. Clog gills, making breathing difficult or impossible, and soil particles absorb light, increasing heat within an aquatic system, driving off more desirable denizens of the water. You know, it's one thing to recite these statistics, it's another to witness it. One day, while working along the northern border of our farm, I was startled to find a full 12-inch drop from our fence line. And we just took this picture. This is Mark's foot. It was as abrupt as a step, yet no natural contour of the land would suggest it ought to be there. It was the result of tillage and erosion year after year after year. It won't return, not in our future or our great-grandchildren's future. Shouldn't we preserve what's left? Michael Carey's essay, Uncle Maris on Structure of Soil from Iowa, A Portrait of the Land, puts it like this. Yesterday, a fog rolled in, and a soft drizzle turned into rain some 50 miles from here. So today, in response, the creeks have risen. And in the middle of the soggy bottom, a huge, wet, silver snake begins to shimmer and shine. The river remembers its bed, Uncle Maris always told me. The Corps of Engineers can straighten out the banks all they want, but the river remembers. Ask any farmer and he'll tell you. I'd gotten stuck, almost buried in gumbo one too many times to doubt him. The black glue sticking to the axles and wheels on my tractor and disc, and then hardening. It's worse than cement, he'd remind me. Keep it off your equipment. Wash everything as soon as you muddy it, or you will never be able to get it clean. He knew the power of the thing he was tending, what dark forces lay hidden in the memory of the soil. He worked it all his life, but he feared it too and respected it. Wasn't the dark life of the rich soil, the richest on earth, death really, and beautiful decay? Hadn't billions upon billions of living things laid down their short lives for us to stand on and in and to plow? Wasn't that what we meant by organic matter? Wasn't every farmer in the whole world trying to make money in the end from the lives and sacrifice of others? Wasn't everything in this fertile land floating on a sea of death? If for 1 second we realized how many lives are sacrificed to help us now make a living, we would tend the grave more carefully. We wouldn't let one sacred ounce of it slip away down the Missouri or give it away, as so many have done before us, to the distant swamps of the Mississippi Delta. 1/2 of prairie earth, he said, is air. 1/2 of the earth we stand on is sky. Heaven has come and made the ground fragile. Ask the wind and the water and the worms. Ask all the microorganisms that breed and seed and feed on what feeds you. Step knowingly. Once again, the white corn and the ripening beans bend themselves when they hear the distant roaring closer. In these painfully changing times, there's nothing stopping whatever happens. Whatever happened yesterday, 50 miles north and east of here, matters desperately today to me and to you. To the people who may never have left home or looked up and wondered what it was that was coming, who put this food in our hands, what in God's name they were doing on this earth so long. And so I think our species has found itself in a winter place. That's Iowa. The fate of the planet is uncertain. There's much doubt and suspicion, much of it warranted, I think. Up until now, we've been frozen, unable to act. But there's hope, right? In the March issue of The Ecologist, authors Vucetich and Nelson purport that hoping that everyone will wake up and see the light, if you will, and begin living more sustainably may actually be doing more harm than good. Hope, they suggest, is a placebo, a distraction merely sowing the seeds of disillusionment. Sometimes I think I agree. We've been hearing for some time that disaster is inevitable and that there is at present an environmental cataclysm. The reason hope seems so counterproductive is because people have begun to see little reason to live sustainably. If the only reason to do so is to hope for a sustainable future, they've begun to feel as if every other message suggests the disaster is guaranteed. People are hearing entirely opposing messages. Hope, but it's no use. The contradictions justify mistrust. The result is inaction. The language of sustainability can ring hollow for me too. It feels empty to me to listen to people suggest recycling, weather stripping, and the like to be more green. Why can that sound so shallow to me? Is it a Band-Aid when a tourniquet is needed? Is a little enough? Refusing receipts at the gas pump or ATM strikes me as not enough. We're told if we all refuse to receive these receipts, we would save the equivalent of 2 billion feet worth of paper, enough to wrap around the equator 15 times. My God, if it's that much paper, I can hardly bear to think what the rest of my paper-filled existence is using. Far more than 2 billion feet, I feel quite sure. Is a little change worth anything at all? I find myself judgmental, disappointed, and at my worst, disgusted. When I contemplate how we came to this winter place, I think we are immature. We've traded full participation in creation for safety and comfort. We've built communities that think only of ourselves. What species doesn't? We, in our quest for comfort, have built buildings that have windows that cannot be opened, cars with heated seats, plug-in air fresheners, and diaper wipe warmers. Holed up in these artificial environments, we live our lives, raise our kids fed on processed foods and electronics. We've traded creation for safety and comfort. It's safe. No one gets hurt watching TV. It's free, save for the advertising, which has cost us everything. Composer and musician Greg Brown extrapolates the current trends into a cynical verse. It'll be one corporation selling one little box. It'll do what you want and tell you what you want and cost whatever you got. One-sided and now superficial for not having known anything else, we're afraid to leave our houses. We've become soft. There's no calluses on our hands or our feet. Our skin is unaccustomed to the light or the wind. We can only sit in chairs, unfamiliar with the ground, the tree trunk, or the rain. These consequences unintended, I'll give you that, but consequences nonetheless. What phase is the moon in? What does good Earth feel like, smell like? Which planet now rests in the western sky? But we keep safe. It's a great winter and our disconnection from the natural world. Keep safe, afraid to die, unable to live, and now ineffective and perhaps harmful in our hope, separated from each other by rules, cubicles, and social status, looking away, ashamed or guilty or judgmental. We are each alone in this self-created winter. Walt Whitman wrote of this searching in his poem, A Noiseless, Patient Spider. A noiseless, patient spider I marked where on a little promontory it stood isolated. Marked how to explore the vacant, vast surrounding. It launched forth filament, 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 out of itself, ever unreeling them, ever tirelessly speeding them. And you, oh my soul, where you stand, surrounded, surrounded in measureless oceans of space, ceaselessly musing, venturing, throwing, seeking the spheres to connect them. Till the bridge you will need be formed, till the ductile anchor hold, till the gossamer thread you fling, catch somewhere, oh my soul. Winter wears thin. We do not hibernate. We do not hibernate. We clothe ourselves in layers of cotton and wool, in scarves, mittens, and boots to protect ourselves from the cold, dry winter. I welcome the opportunity to wear those things in November. I look forward to big, warm sweatshirts and sweaters. I enjoy making soup and bread to feed my body, warm and content to do the same for my family. I light candles to warm and reassure on long winter nights. I enjoy the chance to retreat for a time. Now this clothing has become tiresome and my psyche tattered. I no longer relish the scent of candles. Soup brings me no comfort. Extra blankets on the bed seem only to entangle me, not to keep me snug. I want to throw off those necessary measures of protection from the harshness of winter, and I don't think I'm alone. I've seen the signs in others. My colleagues show a wariness in their eyes. They have an uncharacteristic irritability that is amplified on colder, cloudier days. The weariness and the irritability become verbalized on those days that forecast snow and it becomes realized. In the elementary schools, children have equally shabby snow pants and mittens, many mismatched or repaired with patches that themselves have become torn. The hallways of the elementary schools smell so not so vaguely of clothing fibers that have no hope of drying out. Between repeated contact with little kids' sweat and melting snow. The snow boots are dull and many are missing their laces. These laceless children run around in constant danger of acquiring snow between boot linings and their socks. Parents seem to lack the energy or more likely the incentive to replace them, or perhaps they're just hoping for weather that will allow them to put the boots away, likely to never fit the same child again. Spring, the awakening. All right then. I propose we challenge this winter despair, immobilizing as it may be. I would like to suggest that we are not simply a product of Earth, but that we are Earth manifesting herself. We are her spirit, her selfishness, her destruction. We embody her power, and with that we can turn our thoughts to spring. It is not about hope, it's about living our values. Living sustainably, not because we hope, but because we are compelled by our convictions and connections and sense of responsibility. The time of ignorance is over. We are but a transient moment on Earth manifesting herself. What are you going to do with your moment? Sit there and hope? Mahatma Gandhi suggested that significant change in the world comes about not because of governments, armies, or nations, but by individuals with courage and commitment. Gandhi said of the social changes in India, quote, "And my friends, here you have a history of this entire movement. First they ignore you, then they ridicule you, then they attack you and want to burn you, and then they build monuments to you." I don't think change is typically done in a well thought out, planned manner. I think it's messy. I think those things that made those that made great social changes did so because of their own discomfort. Let us use our own history as a guide. All large social movements have their start in a few gifted, courageous people. These are the abolitionists, suffragists, civil rights leaders, many of whom did not live to see the fruits of their labors. I'd say these changes came about because these people could no longer sit, and when they rose up, they could not stop. They were afraid. We are still afraid in Marshalltown, Iowa. Two of the most outspoken opponents of a recently canceled coal power plant were sent threatening unsigned letters. Some were ridiculed. Rachel Carson was questioned on why she would care about the impacts of insecticides on children when she herself was a childless spinster. Some were imprisoned. I'd say most of the great leaders were imprisoned. Thoreau, Gandhi, Martin Luther King, Nelson Mandela. Some were murdered. I'm not suggesting that we be martyrs. I don't think it's necessary, but hope alone will not do. I'm not hoping. I'm working hard. Work is the stuff of spring, and work is the stuff of change. Change is hard for everybody. It will be hard to change our food system to one that is sustainable. Easier now, I think, than to wait until we have to. It will be hard to change our energy systems to be renewable sources that don't compromise our health or the health of the environment. It will take self-discipline to restore and leave alone wild areas. The rewards are both public and personal. People do make a difference. A few local examples of not what hope did, but not simply courage, but some really hard work. In Marshalltown, Iowa, the coal plant will not be built only because people protested, but because people set up the process for approval that required public input. That's hard, typically unrewarding work. Who really cares about the difference between a 30 and a 90-day public comment period? Seed companies are swamped with orders from people committed to raising their own food. That requires labor, planning, getting dirty, and then cooking. There are fluttering herds of wind turbines popping up all over the Midwest. Many more are on the way. That took investment. Right here in 2005, the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Duluth became a green sanctuary, the first in Minnesota. And we are saying no to the ATM receipts, the plastic grocery bags, and we are switching out light bulbs. While I may find these acts trivial, they are not. No doubt you could think of many more examples of people who do the hard work of change. My point is that it is not a vague notion that things are getting better, but that some people are working really hard to make these things happen. Be absolved by your actions. Make this a trial by fire. Come through the destruction, improved and purified and forgiven by all your actions. Come out of the long winter of our disconnectedness and despair. So as Teddy Roosevelt suggested, do what you can with what you have where you are. Let's take our role. Celebrate the diversity that is our talent. You speak out. You march. Lost my space. You teach. Claire's telling me, my daughter. All right, I'm backing up. Let's take our role, celebrate the diversity that is your talent. You speak out, you write, you speak, you march, you teach. You change your behavior with deliberate self-denial, lifting yourself above who you once were, now bigger, more impactful. Now in your selflessness, you become Earth herself. Life manifesting its own best self. You grow, evolve your own society to be one with life, no longer alone, no longer cold or guilty or judgmental, simply, truly here, fully present in these most unusual times. Appreciated by Michael Carey. It was an asinine thing to do, but what the hell? The garage was clean and the pickup, praised the Lord, after the winter of neglect was once again shining. I did all I could do for the planter that night. Then I sat in the dirt of the barn and rubbed my hands raw on the pile of dropped ears I had scavenged from this coming year's bean field. I would have fed them to the hogs if I had any. I would have fed them to the cows if there were still any around. A few bushel of dry kernels I ended up with would amount to only $3 or $4 after 4 hours of labor. What were a few bushels to the tens of thousands waiting in the bins? But while I was in the barn, there was a quiet celebration. Limerick and Claire sniffed me out and circled themselves down in the straw, thinking, maybe spring is here. He's home again and working. Twisting my fists over the shriveled cobs, I felt like one of the street musicians I knew growing up. My fingers blistered from practice, driven on by the need to work hard enough and long enough at something, no matter how futile, until it turned into a love that was felt by a wider audience. So much for reason, the adult mind and an adult body. Soon, clouds moved in and put on a show of their own. Thunder, lightning, the works. When I was done, the gentle rain sounded like applause. Reflections on spring. This is the starving time. Every spring, as the earth starts to warm, I look for plants that are first to awaken. I look for the emergence of rhubarb with its wrinkled brown-red bud poking up from the bed where it lay dormant since October. From the asparagus, I rake off the thatch of last year's leaves and stems and look for the first point of an asparagus tip. I'm always premature. There's nothing there. I look for the unlikely appearance of the feathery-leaved horseradish. I have to wait. This is the starving time. Early spring, when things were just beginning to look green, Mark and I talked of how we longed for fresh vegetables and fruits from the garden. In this conversation, we remember that this time of year was once called the starving time, a time in the past when many would starve as winter stores had long since been consumed. It was a time when those things just planted had yet to yield. It seems a cruelty to succumb to starvation when surrounded by so much promise. The flowering fruit trees, the corn and bean seedlings just coming up. I would hate to die in the spring surrounded by so much life wanting to make more of itself. Starving time for us is not one of a lack of something to eat. It's a lack of sustenance of sorts. Sometimes I lack an easy connection to the place on which I live. A strong emotional connection to place would help sustain me. Up until just a short time ago in human history, the connection was deep and required if one was to survive. Part of me feels this human emptiness, a sense of not belonging, a stranger in my own environment. I feel as though I'm standing outside, looking in, wanting to be invited to belong to this natural place. In winter, I grow weak and vulnerable. I succumb to the siren calls of strawberries on the grocery shelves in January. Suffering later, I stand in my own kitchen, holding a half-eaten berry, disgusted with myself and the lack of flavor and the hard cardboard-like texture. Duped again. In February, I'm weak-kneed just looking at the alluring red tomatoes. I buy even though I know they're engineered to turn red after they've been picked greener than green and treated with ethylene to force ripening. The flavor's never there. But my longing for the real thing is so great, I just have to try. I'm disappointed. I'm starving. Maybe you've been starving too. I do see signs of spring. I see them in the heaviness of the snow. When it comes now, it's thick, not light, like the airy January snow. The storms are not followed by sub-zero temperatures. When the snow does stop falling, I watch the drifts sag and wrinkle under their own saturated weight. They are not long for this world. I see spring in the fickle character of the weather forecasts. It's as if nature can't make up her mind. This last storm was predicted to produce 1 to 4 inches if it tracks south, and 7 to 10 if it tracks north. My children suggest that winter and spring are fighting, and up until recently, winter, the supposed underdog, had been winning. Spring has shown herself in the slight green tinge at the periphery of the snowbanks. The flocks of migrating cedar waxwings at the crabapple trees. They will remain until all that's left of last year's stale, dried fruit is gone. The birds at the feeder, a pair of cardinals, are now daily visitors. The red-tailed hawk typifies Iowa to me. In the summer, I love to watch as they lazily float above the fields. In the fall, I've seen them swoop upon our prey and rise again. On one very windy day last fall, I was surprised to see one take an attempt at our chickens. The hens went running, clucking wildly for the shelter of the hen house. They refused to come out for the rest of the day. The hawk just missed her mark. Leaving feathers on the ground, she took off empty-handed to hang her frustration on the wind. Now, in spring, I've seen a pair of hawks. Perhaps one is the same hawk I saw last fall. Carry sticks and straw and branches. The nest is large and high. They felt the turning of the seasons and the need to carry on. Our baby chicks will arrive soon. We hope the snowdrifts between our house and the outbuildings that brood these birds is gone by then. When the garden's dry, we'll plant. The time is coming. Soon there will be much work for us to do. The work warms us too, and there will be a need to remove sweatshirts and sweaters. I will turn my face to the warming sun and plant my seeds, for I feel the need to carry on. 2 years passed in mid-March on a rare, sunny, dry day. Mark tilled a small section of the garden. I planted lettuce, spinach, and radishes. Then it snowed. They like it cool. They waited. In May, we were eating from this early garden. These vegetables were crunchy. The lettuce was beautiful, light green, dark green, curly, and smooth. The radishes were red and white, deep green in their foliage. The spinach, a dark green, rich in flavor, perfect in shape, and this was only the beginning. The starving time is over. We are connected whether we know it or not. The natural world welcomes us. We are not separate, just hungry. And the table is set. Drink deeply of the spring air, rich in the scents of peonies and moist earth. Watch closely as the irises give way to Queen Anne's lace and wild rose. Hear the birds, they've gone crazy with celebration. Feel the grasses growing in the heat of the sun and taste the strawberries. Summer. Summer is the season that offers us the easiest direct connection to each other and our land. The longer days offer more time for work and play. On our farm, we have a philosophy of sustainability. Farm is the time we're most likely to implement creative ideas in farming and feeding ourselves. Part of that philosophy of connecting is manifested in our willingness to tithe to nature. It's rarely easy. Let me give you an example. Emma, our daughter, was clearly upset. Appalled, really. She had been attending to her chores of opening up the hen house as she did every morning before beginning the day's activities in earnest. There it had been in the nest box. A single hen, beheaded and bloody. Overnight, a predator had snuck into the hen house, grabbed the hen, and feasted. You can tell the identity of a predator by how it eats its prey. Foxes tend to take their prey away, so livestock will simply disappear. Raccoons are more inclined to take chicks or eggs and are too large to get in and out of the building. Coyotes, though we hear them sing at night, couldn't possibly get in and out of the building and most certainly wouldn't have left the body in the nest box. We came to the conclusion that it was probably a weasel. Doing a little research, we learned that to exclude a weasel from a building, you must block all openings of an inch or more. The building is nearly 100 years old. That's not happening. We also learned that most farmers don't know they have weasels on their property until one kills a chicken. Then it happened again and again. The regular pattern was every other night. We noticed a certain reluctance by the chickens to roost in the hen house in the evenings. It seemed to me as if they began to view it as a lottery of sorts. Which one was going to be sacrificed tonight? Our daughters, too, were becoming reluctant to gather eggs or let the chickens out in the morning, and who could blame them? Truthfully, we don't get too worked up about predators. We need them. They were here first. They keep the rodent populations in check. Rats are awful creatures digging deep holes in outbuildings and eating more than their share of poultry feed. Mice do the same, just on a smaller scale. Still, we were getting close to having lost 10% of the chicken population. Our philosophy is to tithe 10% to nature. We pretty much stick to this philosophy, but 10% is where we draw the line. We drew the line with a goose. An old-timer suggested we get a goose. Geese are alarmists. Enter their domain and they honk and scream and take a very aggressive posture. They get my attention. People with geese, we found, are fond of giving them away. We easily found neighbors and friends willing to part with their birds. With the addition of 2 geese in our hen house, we have been predator-free for 3 years.
Wow.
We continue to tithe to nature. We lose tomatoes to hornworms, a little fruit to the birds, some zucchinis to vine borer and wilt. One of the worst things that can happen to us is to have a plant pathologist or entomologist step foot on our place. They identify every disease and form of pestilence that exists on our farm. We happily eat from the farm's abundance, not knowing the names of every great threat lurking behind each leaf and fruit. The diversity of pest, predator, and disease is part of the diversity necessary to keep our world stable. the more stable, the less likely nature is to demand that we tithe more than 10%. We wish to contribute to the balance, be part of the balance, weasels and all. Think about your tithing, 10%. What would that look like? A reduction of energy use by 10%? What would it take? 10% reduction in water use, or 10% increase in organically or locally produced food? What if you did all these things starting on Earth Day, or every Earth Day make a new commitment? What can you change or give up? What is your creative solution, your goose? And when you've made your contribution or sacrifice, how will you mark it? How will you give it weight and meaning? Celebrate it. Celebration is critical to understanding our spirit, to sustaining our spirit. We cannot carry on our good works if we do not celebrate. Mark has taught me this. My congregation has taught me this. I'm too inclined to what I perceive is practical. Celebration is not on the surface a practical thing to do, but celebration marks the connection. They form the rituals that help create meaning. Celebrate. It was the wind turbine that prompted us to celebrate, with music, with people, with wind. Wind is the bane of existence on a Great Plains farm. More than temperature, wind determines the tasks that can or cannot be completed. Up until now, we didn't have any good things to say about the prairie winds, except, of course, the summer zephyrs. The turbine had been more than a year in coming. The underwriter was my mother. What a tremendous gift, so generous from the heart. She thanked us for being able to put it up. In spring 2008, it had been a wet one. For the first 6 months of 2008 were the wettest 6 months in Weather Service history, even more than the summer of the 1993 flood. Rain came, then the sun for a short time, then more rain. All that on what started as saturated soil. In spite of the weather, the turbine went up. 2 men installed it. These were visionary handymen, enthusiastic and wanting to involve us, to show us everything. They took our picture with the turbine blades. American Gothic. In June, I put in the cool season crops. The visionary handyman put in the turbine. Planting was something I should have done around May 1st or earlier. I used the highest garden, the one that was the driest, if you could call it that. And the rains came again. With it, tornado force winds. The light started flickering at 1:15 a.m. Mark ran down to check the radar. By 1:15, the wind was loud and fierce. I ran down as he ran up to get our sleepy children. We flew into the basement, expecting the house to lift off its foundation. We huddled in the basement. While there, I looked around at the scores of glass canning jars, a few full, some waiting for coming summers. It occurred to me that the very things that hold our food, this glass, could be deadly. I couldn't help but think of the story of the town of Parkersburg, blown off the map just a few days earlier. Our neighbors across the field lost relatives. They told us the story of the couple clinging together in the basement only to have their clothes ripped off their bodies as the water heater lifted out of their basement. Only one survived. Then the wind stopped. A quick look around with flashlights in the darkness. One 90-year-old spruce fell to the north. A cherry tree lay facing southeast, and the fence posts that stake up tomatoes were thrown 50 yards northeast. Livestock was okay. Family was okay. House was okay, but for a broken window and a few missing shingles. Back to bed. Then the water began to rise. In the basement, seeping through the walls and the floor, there was no draining as the water table had risen above the basement floor. As we pumped the basement, we heard the turbine. Boom, 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 as it tried to catch the wind. Then it would stop. So 1 week before the party, we had water in the basement for the first time ever. Because the house's location on the top of the hill, water had never been an issue and no sump pump was installed. Now it required a human presence 24/7 to keep the water pumped out and boom, with no generation of electricity. Perhaps we weren't ready to celebrate. The handyman returned, frustrated and concerned. We pumped the basement and looked at this sad mud hole that was our garden. I had violated my own rules about stretches of bare soil. It's never good, too risky for erosion, loss of nutrients. Regardless the efforts for turbine repair, no success was had. Boom, swish of water out of the basement. Both endeavors seemed fruitless. Who can think of a party now? The water finally stopped seeping into the basements a few days before the party. Now installed were fans and dehumidifiers. Not only were we not generating electricity, we were sucking more power off the grid than ever before. Boom. Did I tell you there was a party? The whole congregation was invited to celebrate summer solstice and the turbine. We were to have live music, much to eat and drink and to dance, and to be in the summer moment together, young and old. At 2 o'clock on the day of the party, our turbine handyman and his son showed up with a whole new unit for our turbine. It turns out our little tornado had damaged the turbine in a way never seen in the field, only in the laboratory. By 4 o'clock, it was installed, turning and generating electricity. By 5 o'clock, participants in the party started arriving. And what a party! What wonderful people came to celebrate with us, blessing us with their participation. Our minister blessing our farm and our turbine, our rural electric cooperative witnessing the public support for such a refreshing means of generating electricity without extracting fossil reserves from deep in the planet. That celebration still holds great meaning for me. Fall. Harvest, gratitude, and reflection. Fall is the time of harvest. We need moments to pause and reassess, measure the successes, take stock of our efforts. I think it's also time to take notice of all that we did not plan. Perhaps it's a time to think of the future implications of work, a time to trust that good works will come to fruition even if we're not present to serve witness. The unfortunate katydid and the lucky beetles. I have the privilege of tucking my son Martin, now 7, in bed every night. I love this time we share, as this is when I really hear what's in his heart. He told me last fall that his friend Sam found a leaf bug during recess. Okay, I know that's not a katydid, okay? I know this guy's an entomologist. From this description, I think it was probably a katydid, but this, I believe, is a cicada, right? Yes. Thank you. I knew you know. He went on to explain how the other boys killed the bug by throwing rocks at it. Even after it was dead, Martin said that Sam didn't even get to keep the body. The whole thing made him sad, and while it is a sad story, and I felt bad for the bug, Sam, and Martin, it's a story about the presence of compassion in a child. Both Sam and Martin felt for the animal and felt a moral responsibility not to kill out of curiosity or cruelty. I think these boys are growing into young men with compassion. Perhaps they'll be able to contribute to making ours a better world. Perhaps they already have. Worry, doubt, and fear, I've heard these are the enemies of personal peace and function to immobilize. Probably so, and I have plenty doubt and fear, but peace is always available to me in the garden. Even my blunders seem to have resulted in what can offer me solace. Hooray for serendipity. I sort of inadvertently planted a large double row of celosia last year. It resulted from an over-enthusiastic transplant of nearly every tiny germinated seed. I have been a bit compulsive about seeing that most survived. This is only a few of them. This variety had nice red stems and lovely little spike of deep pink flowers. It's pretty in the garden, but a rather poor performer in the vase. It wilts after a while, but there it was, taking up a good 4 by 50 foot in the garden. It wasn't pulling its weight. Or so I thought. While snooping around for fall lettuce and looking for peas, I heard the celosia, buzzing and fluttering. There was much activity among the flowers. We found parasitic wasps, the kind that help us with insect pests, and little black and yellow beetles. They were copulating and foraging simultaneously in an amazing sexual feat by human standards. Perhaps not so impressive for those who together have 12 legs. Swallowtail butterflies, bumblebees, and honeybees dancing around each other, sipping from the flowers. Monarchs by the dozen gathered around these flowers. This place had become a haven for monarchs, waiting for the wind to be just right to carry them to Mexico. We had become the bed and breakfast, and I planned them all over again to provide this layover. The unfortunate katydid and the lucky beetles, life isn't fair. It isn't peaceful for all in the end. May we find the opportunity to teach our children to express and practice compassion, and provide a place where peace and compassion can be expressed. I believe in being deliberate in the practice of acting as you believe. Part of this belief system is that we reflect together on what we hold dear. This reflection can evoke grace, and grace is what we all most desperately need, are afraid to ask for, and are lucky to receive. Reflection. This story is from a few years back. Picture this. Dinner is finally ready. Our older children have been asked twice to join us at the table. There is much shuffling of rapidly growing feet, arms, and legs. The toddler is showing some serious resistance to being put in the high chair. He wants his dinner now. His chair is strategically placed close to the less exasperated parent. We are ready to say grace. At our house, it goes like this. Provider of all, we thank you for the food before us. We acknowledge the sacrifices necessary to bring the food to our table. We thank you for the gift of life and ask your blessings on all at our table. We say grace to make a deliberate expression of gratitude for our food and each other. We also use it to express our desire to continue to be blessed with good fortune. The grace is said to the earth, sun and rain, the soil that nurtures our food, animals used to provide us with meat, eggs, and milk, and the people that raise our food. The ritual begins by taking hold of your neighbor's hands. The two older children are placed around the table in such a manner as to prevent each from having to hold the hand of the other. This could lead to dinnertime unrest. Meanwhile, the parents long to hold each other's hand, but are now separated by their offspring. The grace begins. We have used the same one for more than 10 years. Provider of all, thank you for the food before us. The toddler screams and yanks his hands away from his flanking family members. He wants to eat. If there was a mood, it's lost. In spite of this, we continue with our grace. We always do. We acknowledge the sacrifices necessary to bring it to our table. It's our ritual. It gives order to our unpredictable world. Sometimes it helps remind me of all I have to be grateful for, but most of the time it marks the beginning of our shared meal. The meal we insist on sharing with each other, whether we like it or not. Grace. I take in grace, but not often enough. Grace is the night sky when you're taking out the garbage. It remains there in all its starry glory, waiting for you to put down the garbage lid. And just look up. It's the smell of autumn leaves as they begin to rot, a smell you remember from your childhood and reminds you of new clothes, a new school year, all your great expectations as a youth. It is the silent snow with its large white flakes against the night sky falling while you sleep oblivious. We thank you for the gift of life. I have found grace in my children, baby wisdom. The look a newborn gives you as he sees you for the first time. Have you had the privilege of seeing this first real look? Oh my, what is that but grace? The searching eyes of this wet, tiny human seem to speak of ages of humanity's endless new beginnings. Grace. Grace comes too in the look of your child's face at the school concert when she searches the audience for your face. She lights up when she finally finds you, first relieved and then proud. No doubt this reaction is transient, one that will be hard to elicit in a few years. This makes it all the more precious, and all I had to do was be there for her. I have found grace in my friends in whose company I find relief. These are people with whom you can be yourself, and they love you anyway. Those kinds of friends are rare in my life, and spending time with them feels as though I'm drinking after a long thirst. Grace happens in those moments between order and the predictable in our lives, between all that we have planned. I'm not ready to give up order in hopes of finding greater grace, but perhaps a deeper look into those moments between could yield gifts that have always been there, waiting. In the words of Reverend Kate Rhodey, grace comes in all those moments of that life gives us gifts, not because we deserve them, but because we are. Back at the dinner table, Grace is almost said, "And ask your blessings on all at our table." The toddler quietly and with the greatest sincerity puts out his hands to be held by his sister and his father. He makes the circle complete. He has brought grace to the table. Grace can also come in those moments that leave us with no choice but to let go. This happened to me once when I participated in a prairie burn. My first real prairie burn was one where I was supposed to be one of the persons in charge. I found this somewhat awkward and somewhat familiar. In my job as a biology professor, I'm expected to be an expert on many things of which I only have a cursory knowledge. The prairie area is 8 or 9 acres. It was only fairly recently established, less than 15 years. It hadn't been burned for 3 or 4 years, and burning is part of the natural cycle for a prairie, something essential to its health. This prairie is composed solely of grasses, no forbs, or those plants that are not grasses or trees. So there were no showy flowers. We were planning on planting those flowers once the prairie had been burned. We had 25 students from both my botany class and a humanities class, one experienced biology faculty, one inexperienced biology faculty, and one humanities faculty, bless her heart, who required volunteerism of her students. We were armed with 5 rakes, 4 flappers, which are rubber mats attached to long broom handles, and 1 flame weeder. The weather was perfect. There was a small amount of wind, not too much coming from the west. It started out just as planned. We lit the backfire in the direction that we expected the wind to blow a fire we would light later. The 2 fires were expected to meet and put each other out. We waited in the north in an adjacent cornfield. The other side of the prairie was bounded to the south by a short stretch of woods and a creek. To the west was a pond, and to the east, more than 60 acres of land that had been in conservation reserve program for more than 10 years. It had not been tilled, hayed, pastured, or burned for 10 years. To slow the fire down at the east end, a 30-foot strip of grass had been mowed between our prairie and the adjoining eastern property. This was to allow us to put out the fire before it left our little prairie. The fire and the grasses were spectacular. The sound and the smell were exciting, invigorating. I felt really present. There was no thinking about the past, no planning my next meeting, no worrying, no future, just this fire eating its way up the hill. The fire to the west was set. It moved toward the first fire as planned. Rabbits ran out of the grass. Smoke pillared high into the air. I could actually feel the energy that had been trapped in these plants set free as heat and light. I understood that this all came from the sun. It was captured as photosynthesis, quietly absorbed photons of sunlight and used that energy to make sugar, starch, and cellulose. All that sun was now being released in this orange and black finale. The fire escaped into the corn stubble. It was moving towards me and the students. We quickly learned how hot those grasses had become. We learned to maneuver our rakes upside down and scratch patches of bare earth where the fire could not burn. The flappers were used to smother other fires. We learned not to flap them, but to be gentle so as not to fan the flames. I was so proud of my students. They worked hard. Their inhibitions were gone. They too were in the present and only the present. They did not check their watches to see if the class hour was over. They did not ask if what it is they had to know for the exam. They didn't ask, why are we doing this? I was pleased. The fire got out of control. The wind picked up. The fire created more wind of its own, and it leapt over our mowed area to the east and began burning the fence posts and moving into the 60 acres of conservation reserve land. We called the fire department. They called 2 more fire departments. My students did not leave. They kept working. 40 additional acres were burned. No one was hurt. No buildings were lost. To the land to the east was returned nutrients that had been slowly pulled from it by the vegetation for 10 years. The new grasses will have a better nutrition, more sunlight, and warmer soil from which to begin fresh this spring. It is a better start than it had had for years, and for this part of Iowa, it's a more natural start. I was oscillating between horror and joy. Horror at how out of control fire would affect my position. I really thought I might be fired. What would the administration say? The town, the owner of the land. I was relieved no one was hurt. Joy to see what was the natural order, the way of this land. The need for that grassland to burn was greater than our ability to control it. It had been waiting for just a spark. It had no property line, no human owner. I had a change in my understanding of ownership, my understanding of land management. I could forget the property line for just one moment and be glad of that extended burn. It was a gift to us both, unexpected grace. And so before I close tonight, will you join me in community and in voice in singing For the Earth Forever Turning 163, and please stand up because you've been sitting a long time. the joy would be shallow. To spring, without the work, there will be no change. Do the work. To summer, tithe, give your 10% in whatever currency you are called to do. Celebrate the little things, the big things. Do it together. Don't be like me, too practical, you'll never get to dance. In fall, drink in the grace when it comes to you in stolen moments, a kiss, a touch, a tear, the breeze. These are what save us, connect us to the world, to each other. And when you think of the tragedy that appears to be inevitable, and I fear it is inevitable, do not let yourself sink too deeply into hopeless despair. Consider the contributions of people like John Muir, who lobbied to save public wild areas, and Rachel Carson, who alerted to the whole country to the dangers of pesticides like DDT. People like these are still among us, and it is because of them that I do have great hope. What these two very different people had, I think, is a deep sense of their place in nature. Don't think, however, that these two could do what they did in isolation. Their impact was made possible only because people listened and people acted. We are all imperfect in our approach to life, but let us be among those, some who may forever remain nameless, that made a difference. So this weekend, tell me and each other your stories. What do you grieve? Your anger, your despair. Tell each other of your good works, the difference you undoubtedly make. Let this weekend be a celebration of all we hold in common. And finally, in our community, our shared time together, no doubt there is grace. Let us drink deeply from that cup kept full and nurtured by our blue boat home. May it be so.
So, you guys want a little conversation? People are kind of tired, so. Is that like a Q&A thing you were thinking?
No, I don't care.
You don't really care? All right. So, should we just thank you and then you're done?
Yeah.
Okay, give it up for her.